Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me as always is Ken. So how are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well. As this is going out, it is the academic break, so I guess my workload is slightly less and enjoying some downtime and some self-care. Rory, how's things your side?
Well, I wish I could say I'm enjoying the sunshine at Counselling Towers, but when I look across the valley, I can tell you it's raining wet and looks like it's October, which isn't really the 4th of July. So yes, it's the academic break, and we've got a interesting podcast from our good friends at the BACP today. They have approached us just to chat about people setting up in private practice, and I caught up with Joe Langston and Kaz Binstead, talking about resources for setting up in private practice and also the ethics of setting up in private practice. Lots to think about. I think there's a lot of people who I'll set up in private practice. Maybe the employment situation in the UK is a little difficult at the moment, so I'll set up privately. Just so much to think about, Ken.
There's and I think this is the beauty of these podcasts is we during the academic time we kind of run to a very specific formula, but we like to step out of that formula during the academic breaks and go into our special series, and we've had a lot of great feedback from the special series, and I think that you've really hit a topic that is so current right now, Rory. As you're saying, so many people graduating. So many people that maybe are reevaluating how they might work going forward. And maybe one of those considerations is private practice. And private practice, I can say from being in it myself for many, many years, is very rewarding. But balanced onto that are the challenges that private practice bring. And I think, like so many things, you don't know what you don't know. So looking at it, it can be, I know what I'll do. I'll just get a room in my house ready and jump into private practice. But there's a lot to consider. And I think that this interview covers some of the important topics.
Yes. And the old phrase, how difficult can this be? Is one that people will find out when they start. So we caught up with Joe and we caught up with Kaz. And they recorded this piece for us. We had a good bit of fun doing it, but I think the message that came from it is you need to use a lot of resources. Be very thoughtful about ethics. So let's see what happens when I caught up with Joe and Kaz.
Yeah, and just before we go into that interview, I just want to let you know that after the interview, we've got a super duper handout that you can get free of charge that is related to this. So let's go and have a listen.
And welcome to this very special edition of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And we've got a really special, really interesting edition here from our good friends and colleagues at the BACP. So I'm delighted to be joined by Joe Langston and Kaz Binstead. So welcome both.
Hi.
And it might be useful. It might be useful if I ask you individually what your kind of roles are at the BACP, so the audience are kind of clear and know who you are and what you do. So, Joe, what is your kind of role at the BACP?
So my title, Rory, is Ethics Services Manager. So the team that I work with, some of your listeners may have contacted already. We have a service run by ethics officers. So that's if you're a BACP member and you have an ethical query, you can contact the ethics officers to go through that. Also, any kind of general questions about the ethical framework as well, and they're more than happy to consider. We've also got the Ethics Hub on the webpage. So that's the sort of a resource that our team oversees as well. So you can go on there and there's some latest resources, so videos, signposting to some of the good practice and action guidance we have. We also have a couple of ethics consultants, so they specialise in more specific areas of practice. So we have an ethics supervisor an ethics consultant for supervisors, and also one for CYP practitioners as well.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. And Kaz?
Yeah, so first of all, my name's Kaz Binstead, just in case anyone wants to look me up. But I am I'm actually one of the volunteers at the BACP, and I sit on the private practice divisional executive, so I'm one of the executives there, and we oversee the private practice division, which is a part of the BACP. People will pay a very small membership fee, and we kind of want to support people in going into private practice, working in private practice, and also provide kind of emotional support as well, acknowledging that it is an area where there can be quite a bit of maybe isolation. And my role there is actually I'm project manager there, and as such, I've been working with BACP Maine on the private practice toolkit. So I've been joint lead on that alongside Adam Pollard, who is in membership engagement services.
So thank you very much, Kaz, and I apologise for mispronouncing your name. It's Binstead. It's I'm afraid it's my dyslexia. Sometimes I miss the odd letter out. So Joe, we're going to be talking about going into private practice. Maybe someone who's a student who's just graduated, or maybe someone who's been qualified and worked in an agency for some time and decides they want to go out in the world of private work on their own. So what are the ethical considerations, Joe, regarding setting up and working on your own? What would a practitioner have to think about?
That's a really good question, and it's one that we do get quite a lot through the ethics services, because obviously we are in a time at the moment, and increasingly so, where maybe paid opportunities aren't as forthcoming as they once were. So we do see more members, especially newly qualified, calling up and asking what they need to consider before going into private practice. And what we'd say is one of the big areas to consider is that of competence. So I think a big jump from maybe going from placement into going into your own private practice is around assessment. So quite often, and certainly in line with our sort of recommendations, if you are in a placement, there should be a qualified, experienced counsellor doing those assessments for you, so that they know that the clients that you're going to be working with sit within your competence. So it's having that real kind of consideration as to how would you set out and assess who you're competent to work with, because once you put once you're out there and you put your name on a directory, you don't know who you're going to kind of get coming in through your inbox or on your telephone. So really kind of consider that, speak to your supervisor, and especially if you've worked with them throughout your placement as well, they should be in a really good place to know whether you're in a position to start seeing clients privately or not. So we've got the sort of competence around assessment. What I would say, and the reason I kind of come in with that first of all, is because when we speak to members on the ethics line, sometimes, I'd say maybe 50-50, we'll get members phoning up who haven't started private practice yet. So they're saying, what do I need to consider? But we do get members who phone up and who, unfortunately, through no malintent of their own, but they have gone into private practice and they have started seeing clients, and it has got to a point where those clients do present with issues that are maybe beyond what the member can currently work with, and that's a really difficult situation to have to address for everyone involved, I think. So what we're trying to do when we're talking to members and giving them guidance around this is to say, we don't want to paint the worst case scenario, but you need to be really realistic as to where you're at in terms of the type of clients that you can work with. So competence and assessment, I'd say, are really important to consider around that. And then also, I think, a big difference, and I think Kaz, you can talk about this, having been, a private practitioner yourself and part of the division. is the isolation that can come with working in private practice as well. So certainly if you've been in a placement, you're used to having support around you. You might have a designated safeguarding person, for example, a case manager, and all of those responsibilities are going to become your own. I mean, obviously you're going to have your supervisor there as well, but that's a lot to take on, I think, when you're, if you're going straight from one to the other. And then along with that, you've got all the other bits and pieces that come with setting up a private practice that sort of fall into the realm of ethics as well. So contracting is a biggie in terms of a good, robust contract. I'm sure, Rory, you've talked about this a lot before, will serve you very well because it sets out, what clients can expect. Making sure you've got your insurers are aware of what's going on, and they're, okay with you going into that. I'll leave the sort of, in terms of setting up a business in general, I don't know if Kaz, you'll be kind of referring to that, but there's obviously all the kind of, business acumen decisions that come with it as well.
So it feels like a very, very big jump, doesn't it? From working in an agency, you're a student, or maybe you've qualified a little while, and it's a very big jump. You're taking on a number of roles that would usually be done by people within the agency: assessment, data protection, safeguarding, and you're doing it on your own. And the message I'm hearing is, by the time a practitioner phones the ethics line up and may have difficulties, that may be really a little bit too late. It could be quite a difficult position to be in. It may be useful to kind of head off that before you do it. And as we always say at Counselling Tutor, you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst case scenario, and you get everything in place. So I guess that getting things in place, Kaz, is a little bit of your overview.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you make a really, really good point, Rory, about just being able to think about things and preempt things before you get to that point where kind of something's happened. And then it's obviously not great for potentially a client, but it's obviously not great for you as a practitioner either. And I think part of this toolkit work has been about the recognition, actually, that maybe therapists need a little bit more support in this. I think that it's I mean, obviously all the training is very, very varied across the country, so there's no set place necessarily where people learn about this very unique area of working. And like Joe was saying, there's so many different facets that make up private practice, and lots of things to think about. So it appears that kind of people might leave their training and think, I want to go into private practice, but they may not have learned that much about it on their course. And then they kind of come out and don't really know where to turn to for things. And I think that can sometimes lead to mistakes being made, because people just try and make a go of it. And they don't know the areas to look at, or the things that they need to reflect on. So we kind of made a decision as a membership body that it was really important that we could provide a little bit of that support, and to almost I guess encourage a process of self-learning, self-reflection. We know that this is needed because people seek out courses on setting up in private practice, having successful private practice, all of these kinds of things. And sometimes these things can be quite costly, actually. I mean, I used to run one of these courses many, many years ago, and there was hardly any of them around then. But these days there are a lot. And then if you put in all the kind of the Facebook groups and all that, so we know it's needed. And we kind of wanted to make it as accessible as possible to our members, and to split it in a way. So for myself, obviously, Joe said I work in private practice. I work full time in private practice, and have done for many years. So to really be able to think about, well, if we set this out on our website in a designated area, how does it need to look? And what needs to go in each of those sections. So, for example, we'll have kind of setting up in private practice. So people might just want to think, okay, right, well, I want to start private practice in, say, 6 months, 4 to 6 months or something. So let me work my way through that. And then we've got managing private practice, developing your private practice, and then finally working as a private practitioner.
So as we've kind of come to, I think, moving from a placement to setting up what effectively is your own business is not just a case of hiring a room and getting 2 comfy chairs. There's
only, right?
there's which sometimes can for people who've never worked, had a kind of business before, may not seem an unreasonable kind of aspiration. I'll hire a room, I have my qualifications, but what I'm hearing is there's so much more, and as a private practitioner, I can definitely agree with this, that things you need to know about, and you're supplying a resource for people to be able to go in there and have a real good look at what they need to be able to work efficiently in the service of the client, ethically in the service of the client, and gain that support. It's a solitary occupation when you decide to move into private practice, and it can be a bit of a shock if you're used to having a huge support network. I'm wondering, Joe, what are the kind of ethical difficulties that practitioners who don't consider, looking at the wide variety of things they have to put in place could get into?
I mean, how long have we got, Rory?
Well, what would you say? I don't want to do
No.
I don't want to do a kind of top 10 of ethical complaints, but just to give people a kind of idea of how they may not serve their clients in the best way possible.
I mean, I think, well, it's interesting you say they might not serve their clients in the best way possible, because I think you can have unintended consequences in quite a lot of different areas, actually. So in terms of consequences with the client, like I mentioned previously, a big one could be that it transpires that client's bringing issues that are beyond your experience and your expertise to work with, and then you've got a situation where you might be sort of 3 or 4 sessions in, and you have to make a really difficult decision to not work with that client anymore, and that can bring up, at the best of times, or the best case scenario, you might have a client who is upset by that. And I say that's the best scenario, because actually at the worst end is a client that's very affronted by that decision and can make a complaint about the practitioner, unfortunately. You've got, I think so that's, I say that's the most common situation you could find yourself in. Other areas, I suppose, with clients and private practice, I'm trying to think about other areas that you might include in your contract. So if you don't have your contract, if your contract isn't robust enough, you might find things around payment actually is another big issue with us. So where clients haven't paid for a couple of sessions and maybe sort of disappear, and members asking us, well, how do they get their money back for those sessions and such like. So those are just a couple of scenarios with regards to clients. A big one that springs to mind as well for the member is their own personal safety. So last year we worked with the Susie Lampley Trust to produce a couple of resources for safe lone working, because unfortunately, we are working in an industry where people can present with different kind of issues and come for different reasons, and members do find themselves in situations where they are experiencing stalking, harassment, and aggressive behaviour in the therapy room as well. So you've got to consider your own safety, and I think there's a temptation quite often that people think, oh, I've got a sort of spare room, that I can start seeing clients in, and there are just a whole myriad of areas you need to consider when you're letting people into your own home, I think, in terms of how you check beforehand, and how you can sort of, where possible, increase your safety. So those are 2 areas, I think, as an example. What I would say is that we do have quite a lot of resources around these areas as well. So if these are all areas that, you're considering, then please do either check the website or come through to Ethics Services, because we'll be more than happy to to talk through your questions about setting up a private practice.
Yes, and I'd pick up, Joe, on the unintended consequences. Having done the Susie Lamplugh training many years ago, one of the things that was kind of startling was that, for those who don't know about the Susie Lamplugh case, she was an estate agent, and she went to a house viewing with a potential client called a Mr. Kipper, and she never returned, and no one to this day knows where she is, and there's a strong presumption that she was murdered. And it was due to and one of the things that was striking about that case was there was absolutely no risk management. In fact, no one actually knew where she was. She hadn't put it in the diary or told anybody where she was going. And it really was a wake-up call, I think, for the entire, for the estate agent profession, but also for anyone else who's loan working, to make sure there was security. Kaz, what do you hope? What's your hope for these resources? What do you hope that the practitioner who is thinking of going into private practice will gain from this kind of very rich resource bank that you've discussed?
Yeah, a lot. I hope they can gain a lot. It's interesting because we've kind of pulled together a lot of the existing resources, which were all over different places on the BACP website. And we are going to be having new resources as well. So I've identified some of the kind of the gaps, if you like, or the things that really need to be gone over more. So, for example, picking up on what Joe was saying there about things in the contract and not being clear enough. So if we take payment as an example, one of the things that's really interesting for me with private practice is the person behind the therapist and the person behind the private practitioner. And my hope is that in addition to things like practice management, marketing, student to private practice, these kinds of core things, that also it encourages people to really, really look at themselves. And we know this is important as therapists anyway, our own identities, but in private practice, it feels even more important. So on that point that Joe made, like if you're a little bit nervous about, say, your cancellation fee, for example, and you might be someone who tends to worry a lot about these things, what do I set my cancellation policy at? Do I say kind of 48 hours or whatever? And if you feel nervous about that and it's difficult for you to focus on that and kind of work through it, that can sometimes then lead to difficulties as well, because you might not communicate it so clearly, or you might be a bit lax on your, kind of move your boundaries, which can then lead to all kinds of difficulties. So I think being able to really have an understanding of some of the things about you as a person, some of the I don't know, your own developments, some things that you can take to supervision, to be in constant discussion with about that. So this all feels very important. And also, even when we talk about stuff like marketing, there's kind of the what you would call the necessities of marketing. Set up a website, go on a directory or whatever, but then there's a lot more than that in private practice, because, for example, if I write a really lovely kind of website saying lots of counsellor-y type things, and then the client comes into the room, sits down with me, and they just don't seem to match what they read on the website about me and how I actually am in real life, that can be a real problem for actually people's private practices. And people tend to find that if they can't really engage with exactly who they are and communicate that, that can, I don't know, clients might come for an initial session and then might pick up on that and not actually choose to work with the person. So it's like all these little subtle things. Yes. And what I would really want is for people to feel like it's a good journey, it's good exploration, and it's effectively what's going to make you in the long term have a successful practice. So some people get very stuck on this idea when they qualify of, I need to have 15 clients within like a couple of months or something.
Yes.
And that's not really how it works. Actually, it's much better to spend a little bit of time investing in yourself, doing this self-reflection, investing in all the other things as you would with any other business, by the way, as well. And then in the long term, you're gonna come off a lot better. So yeah, kind of self-learning. We don't want it to come across as like a punitive thing from the BACP, that it's like a, you must do this or you can't work in private practice or whatever. Instead, it's an invitation to say, look, this stuff is going to really help you out. The material at the moment, over 80% of it is free at the moment. So, I really hope that people want to engage with that and can do so alongside their supervisor. One more quick point, Rory, to just say about supervisors. I really, really recommend people find a supervisor who has worked in private practice or does work in private practice. Obviously, such an important part, coming back to that point that Joe made about isolation, because the buck stops with you when it's your private practice. So having a good supervisor is really, really crucial.
Yes, and I guess what I'm hearing is that there's, you don't know what you don't know. So going into private practice without doing some form of research, understanding, as you've outlined, things about your website, your marketing, about how you set up security, can be done with the best intentions, but actually may have quite unintended consequences, which could lead to a difficulty with ethics, Joe.
Yes, and just a couple of things I think that Kaz picked up on that made me think, oh yes, and that. Workloads, caseloads, setting your own caseloads and setting boundaries as well. There can be this temptation, especially if this is your sole, source of income, to have this rush to try and get this full caseload. And it's hard work and it's taxing and it's tiring, and you've got to think about the types of clients that might walk in the door and the additional work that comes around with that. So I think the discussions that you have with your supervisor is also around, well, where do you start with this? How many cases do you start with? It doesn't have to go 0 to 60. Can you take this slow and steady and see how it feels for you and take it at a pace where you can kind of increase it in a way that's healthy for you. I think that means we've got to think about self-care. That's in the ethical framework. So always think of where yourself in this as well and the impact it's going to have on you. And boundaries, I was just going to say around I think the temptation as well can be to make yourself available at all time. So again, think about when the time you need for yourself and the time that you're going to have to space between that and all the other things that kind of come with that.
I mean, I think that is just sage observations, to be honest. And as we are in this kind of, at the time of recording, this difficult time, certainly in our existence with the COVID-19 pandemic and people thinking up maybe they need to set up in private practice. These are all things that are needed to be thought through, especially if you're working, as we are now, in the online world. That's a whole other element that needs to be taken on. So I wonder, as we come to the end of this interview, Kaz, if you could offer one piece of observation, and notice I don't use the word advice, for someone who's setting up in private practice, an observation, what would it be?
I would just say, the exploration is good. You learn a lot as a trainee, but you know what? That learning continues. And within those first 2 or 3 years, just soak it up. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of I'm going to make a mistake. Use your support networks, use the resources, and go for it. Do that self-learning, and successful private practice, it can be done.
Yeah, so stay a student always.
Exactly. Yeah.
and Joe?
I'd say consult, prepare, and take your time. And I think what you said, something, Rory, what was it? You don't know what you don't know.
No, yes.
So how are you going to increase your Johari's window so that you do know? Who can you speak to who is honestly going to turn around and give you an honest kind of assessment of where you are? and what you need to do. And please, consult with as much, information and support as you possibly can.
Could I press you on another point? Ethical decision making.
Yes, absolutely. So ethical decision making is the sort of glue, I think, between the ethical framework and your practice. So and it's not something that just happens once or after the event. Ethical decision making, I don't like using the word should, but it's good practice if you like. The ethical decision making is present throughout all the decisions you make in relation to your practice. So I would say, if you're not familiar with an ethical decision making process, there are resources online. We've got a quite a lengthy guide. We've also got a sort of shorter infographic for it. Have a look at it, use it when you're speaking to your supervisor, and consider the different stages of your thinking. Think about the ethics within that as well. And there's a nice little phrase we talk about: defendable decision making, because at the end of the day, there's rarely a right or wrong answer. But if you've got a defense that's based in ethics as to why you made that decision, that will take you a long way.
I think those are wise observations. So, Kaz Binstead, Jo Langston, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the podcast, and thank you very much.
That was incredible, Rory. Just listening, learning. So there's more than even I thought, and I was in private practice for some time, but you forget sometimes how detailed it is and kind of what you need to consider.
Yes, and I think that sometimes when you work for an agency, they hold a lot of the kind of things that were being talked about by Jo and Kaz, and Jo brought up the Susie Lamplugh Trust.
Yes,
and you heard me comments on the lone working. And these are things that we really need to take seriously. And I think sometimes they're not things that are taught in standalone counselling courses, because of all the practice hours are done in a placement. They're actually done with people around, hopefully. And so a lot to think about, and a lot of resources. And as you say, Ken, Jo talks about ethical problem solving. We'll put links to that on the webpage. So if you go to counsellingtutor.com, look for the podcast tab, go to page 157, you'll find the links that Kaz and Jo talked about, but also you'll find our handout, an ethical problem solving grid, which I wrote a few years ago, and I have to say has been downloaded a lot through the years. Students have used it a lot through the years, but yeah, it's a really important thing, and certainly in these times when people are setting up in private practice, hooking up with other therapists, using resources and thinking ethically is just so important. Yeah,
I agree. Could not agree more. And I like how you've drawn that kind of parallel to the difference of working within maybe a multidisciplinary team. When you're in private practice, you're creating your own multidisciplinary team in terms of who you might refer to, but you're missing, I guess, that element of if you're faced with an ethical dilemma, who you go to. And of course you can go to your supervisor, and that would be expected. You can contact your ethical body, you might contact your insurer, but there are some times that we're called on to make a decision and pretty quickly, and we need to have, I guess, what's called defendable decision making, where we're able to show how we came to that decision. And that ethical problem solving matrix is just the job. It walks you through what you need to consider, think about, asks you questions to reflect on. And as Rory's pointed out where you can get that, it's our website. It's counsellingtutor.com. On the website, go to our podcasts tab. It's episode 157. Everything is there. Put in your name, your email address. We will send it to you. It's been great checking in with you, Rory, during this break, just for this special. And I think the good news is we have another special coming up soon.
We do. Our friends at the BACP have contacted us on a number of occasions. And yes, we have another special. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag, as we say in the north of England. Not that we put cats in bags. That would be a terrible thing. That would be a terrible thing to do.
We've got to put the disclaimer in here
in case I get letters in the post bag. Yeah, we've got another special with the BACP. And what I can tell you, as before we go back into academia in 2020. we've got another special that we're recording with our friends at the BACP. So quite a lot of information. But the big takeaway, I think, from this podcast, the interview with Joe and Kaz, is to use the resources. If you're part of an ethical body, use the resources. If you remember, go into the resources. They provided it for you. Although, as Kaz said, the private practice resources, I think there's a small fee for some of them, but there's a lot of free resources on the BACP site, if you remember.
Well, that brings us to the end of this special edition. Thank you very much, Rory, for taking the time to reach out and get that in the bag. I'm not mentioning any cats here, Rory. And wherever you find yourself, if you're listening to this in real time and it is your academic break and you're taking a bit of a breather, all strength to you.
Absolutely. And as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and look after each other.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counsellor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counsellor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.